Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I hope you had a great week. Looking forward to the weekend. I certainly am. Let's move on to Africa. Vice Chair and current favorite of the Saudis of the Transitional Military Council, Mohammed Hamdan Hemedti, arrives in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia yesterday and was met by Prince Khalid Faisal. I wrote about the Gulf increasing their involvement in the Horn of Africa, and I said Gulf countries now appear to see the Horn of Africa as their hinterland, and all are jostling for optimal geo-economic positioning. Moody's Investor Services downgraded Zambia's ratings to Caa2. This reflects increasing external and liquidity pressures, which raise the probability of default over the near term. So we've got to keep an eye on that. I tweeted back to Paul Wallace, Gregory Smith, the level of delusion is at Quaalude levels. And for me, that is ultimately the biggest risk. Vedanta Concola liquidation case adjourned to June 4. Vedanta is fighting the government's attempts to seize KCM, which is one of the biggest employers in Africa, Africa's second largest copper producer. The case involving KCM has stirred up concerns in the mining industry about rising nationalism in Africa, where Tanzania and DR Congo have been seeking a greater share of mining revenues. Lawyer for the liquidator Jonas Zimba told reporters on Friday the case has been adjourned because Vedanta has not served several documents. The Zambian government has said it is not seizing private assets or breaking any laws. It has cited breaches of KCM's license to operate, the company's financial situation, and said it was talking to 3 prospective investors, although it has declined to name them. Vedanta said it would fully defend its legal rights and has serious concerns about the intentions of the applicants and the procedures that were followed by ZCCM as a representative of the government to obtain a provisional liquidation order. Zambia, which hiked rates, caught 0.5% yesterday and actually improved the currency, but I doubt it will last very long. And you remember April last year in an interview with Ronak Gopaldas when he was writing for BD Live, I said, what's going to undo this Eurobond rally in African Eurobonds is a big ticket failure. And I said Zambia looks a likely candidate, and that was in April 2018. And October 2018, I said, additionally, the moderate ratings for the Gambia, Zambia, and Ethiopia were recently changed to the risk of high distress. And I said, what we know is dominoes are set to fall. IMF Congo meet as President Tshisekedi seeks reconciliation. Non-government organizations want the IMF to undertake an independent audit of the management of public companies, according to a letter addressed to the Managing Director, Christine Lagarde. They also called for unpublished mining contracts to be made public. Opacity in the management of public companies has only increased since the program ended. Local organizations singled out state-owned mining company Gikamin, saying its transactions with international investors are done in darkness. Gertler has been under US sanctions since December 2017 for allegedly using his friendship with Kabila to strike opaque and corrupt mining and oil deals. Chinese companies built roads and hospitals that are financed by Chinese banks and reimbursed through copper exports found from a mining venture called Sicomines. Tshisekedi hasn't said if he intends to request financial assistance from the IMF. But that's a good move, because I think the IMF then comes in and shines a light on what's been going on. Zimbabwe's currency fix is failing. It has too few dollars. The Southern African nation effectively devalued its currency, known as RTGS dollars, in February, when it ended the peg to the US dollar and allowed it to trade on an interbank market. That was to try to end dire shortages of fuel, medicine, and other imported goods. It hasn't worked out as planned. The black market rate remains much weaker than the official one amid a lack of dollar supplies from the central bank and foreign investors. the central bank carried out a second big devaluation on Wednesday of almost 25%, which has taken the official price of the RTGS to around 4.76 against the greenback. The parallel rate is 33% weaker at 7.1. This is not a good sign, especially if they've pumped in close to the amount that they're talking about. Currency puzzle, Zimbabwe finally overhauled its dysfunctional whack and even voodoo FX regime. I wrote that on the 25th of February. Tendai Biti was predicting a 6 to 8 range, whilst the government was looking for it to appreciate to 2.5, which is best characterized as Hail Mary economics. I said on the 21st of January, what is clear to me is that Zimbabwe is at a tipping point moment. I think that moment is closer. I said then the mind game that ZANU-PF played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke. And I said also, the point I was seeking to make is that there is a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. Zimbabwe is a classic example. 8th of October last year, where the problem really started, the government's voodoo economics, where it spent $1.3 billion priming the economy ahead of the election. Money it did not have was the straw that broke the camel's back. I was also quoting Kapuscinski when I said the choice of that moment is the greatest riddle of history. Zim state propaganda is in overdrive mode as it tries to lay the ground for inevitable protests against what many see as ruinous governance, theft, and endemic corruption. Piers Pigou. South Africa's collateral damage in US-China trade war is a headline by Bloomberg, and let me take you back to that point that I was making about emerging markets, when I said emerging and frontier markets are shivering as they start to factor in the China emerging and frontier markets feedback loop. South Africa is a classic example. If China sneezes, a whole lot of countries are going to get a very serious bout of influenza. I said, interestingly, in our case here, we're relatively immune, not so immune, you can see what's happened at the stock market, to this phenomenon because China is not a big taker of our exports. So that's already been affecting South Africa. South Africa may be almost 12,000 kilometers from Beijing and even further away from Washington, D.C., but the mass producer of fruit and wine is still affected by the US-China trade war. We're battling a little bit of a headwind with the US-China trade war, they say. Dollar Rand, I think, is going to weaken further and head towards 15. We're currently at 14.44. Old Mutual suspended its chief executive officer, Peter Moyer, over what its directors called a material breakdown in trust and confidence. This is a big deal as well. Question is, what does this mean for Moyer's future? And if he were to leave, would that mean a change in strategy? Share price fell about 6%, but then recovered to -1. The best performing currency in the world is the Egyptian pound, and it's strengthened to 16.862. EGX 30 is up 5.68% year to date. Nigerian Stock Exchange, the main board index, has wiped out almost all of its 2019 losses, thanks to the recent arrival of a new giant listing, MTN Nigeria. The all share, which was down big, is up now 0.15% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange minus 1.6% year to date.